"You're not invited." The words hit like a slap, echoing across the marble plaza. The young security officer's hand was raised, palm flat, sharp, final, stopping the old man mid-step. His voice carried over the low hum of the crowd gathered for the veterans' memorial ceremony. Families turned briefly, curious, then politely looked away. Cameras kept rolling for the speeches beginning at the podium. The morning air was bright, almost too clean, the kind that made every sound carry further than it should have. The old man froze where he stood. His boots, cracked, hand-polished leather, ground softly against the stone. He held a folded American flag tight against his chest, the cloth worn at the edges like something often touched, never displayed. His cap's faded emblem caught a glint of sunlight, but no one noticed. "Sir," I said, "step back. This area is restricted." The officer's tone hardened, trained, impatient. "If your name's not on the list, you don't enter. I won't tell you again." A few in the crowd glanced toward them now. One woman whispered to another. A veteran in a wheelchair shook his head slightly, but said nothing. The old man's reply came softly, steady. A voice rasped, thin by years, but not weakness. "I'm not here for the speeches. Just came to see a name." The officer shifted his stance. "Then you can see it from there. Behind the line." He pointed to the far curb as if dismissing a trespasser. For a moment, the man didn't move. His eyes, pale gray, tired, unblinking, fixed on the wall beyond the barrier where the names shimmered under the noon light. One hand tightened around the flag until his knuckles whitened. Behind him, a small boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Why won't they let him in?" he asked quietly. The father didn't answer, just lowered his head. Then, faint but growing, came the low, rhythmic thrum of engines rolling closer down the avenue. A convoy. Dark vehicles with flags rippling from their hoods. Heads turned slightly as the sound deepened, an approaching gravity pressing through the air. But the officer didn't look away. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to cut. "Sir, I don't want to call this in. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The old man's eyes didn't leave the wall. His grip on the folded flag eased, slow, deliberate, as if he were steadying himself against something larger than the moment. He said nothing, but somewhere behind the rows of uniforms and cameras, someone had stopped walking, and they were watching. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. The line hadn't moved, and neither had the old man. Behind the cordon, officials in polished dress uniforms moved with practiced ease, nodding to one another, adjusting microphones, rehearsing scripts they already knew by heart. Wreaths stood tall on easels beside the granite monument, red and white roses woven together in solemn symmetry. The wall itself was spotless, shimmering under the midday light, its carved names deep, precise, and endless. Just outside the barrier, Gregory Brenner adjusted the grip on his cane. He had stood quietly since the officer's outburst, neither retreating nor resisting. The sun laid a line of heat down his back, but he didn't flinch. His hat, the kind worn by deckhands long ago, bore the faded emblem of the United States Navy, barely visible now beneath years of wear and weather. He wore a jacket one size too large, sleeves rolled to the wrist, collar pressed flat. The folded flag in his arm was held with the kind of care a man gives to something he's had to earn and lose more than once. A breeze swept through the plaza, tugging at the hem of his jacket. Gregory squinted up toward the wall as if counting the rows of names. He didn't lean on the cane the way some men did. His grip was firm, his posture drawn up with quiet restraint, like he still remembered how to stand for inspection. Behind the lined face and white stubble, there was something in his eyes. Not just age, but memory. Deep memory. The kind that settles into the bones. He took a small step forward, not toward the barrier, but to the side, just enough to let him see the names engraved behind the wreaths. The guard stiffened. "Sir, you're not cleared to linger here. I'm going to need you to return to the public viewing area." Gregory gave a slow nod. He did not argue, did not speak, just shifted his weight and took another step sideways, keeping his distance, eyes still on the wall. He moved like a man who understood rules, even if they had forgotten him. A reporter brushed past, camera slung over one shoulder. She barely noticed the man beside her, more focused on framing the next speech from the state official now testing a microphone. A loudspeaker popped with static. The plaza's attention shifted. Gregory exhaled through his nose. Beneath his thumb, the edge of the flag's fold had begun to fray, the fabric thinned by decades. He didn't smooth it out, just let it sit there, creased and quiet, a shape he knew without needing to look. The security officer stood straighter now, as though uncertain whether to act again. But Gregory had made no further attempt to approach. He was still outside the invisible line, still in the realm of the unimportant, a man without a badge, without a podium, without a seat. The air grew warmer. Cicadas whined in the distance, their rhythm bleeding into the muted stirrings of the crowd. The ceremony hadn't started, but the mood was shifting toward attention. Gregory let his eyes fall from the wall to the photograph now tucked in his jacket's inner pocket. He didn't pull it out, not yet. He didn't want it to wrinkle. This wasn't the first time he'd come here. Not the first time he'd stood like this, alone, ignored, patient. He had walked this stretch every year on the same date, always at the same hour. He had never asked for an escort, never expected anyone to wait for him. The flag had been folded after a storm. The photo taken with a Polaroid. The name he came for was always there, etched halfway down the second panel, third column from the left. But this year, something was different. There were barricades now, clipboards, guest lists, roped-off zones with folding chairs and assigned seating. And the guard at the gate wasn't much older than 25. Gregory shifted again, the cane tapping once against the stone. His knee had begun to ache. It always did when he stood too long on the left side. A souvenir from an engine room fall during an evacuation drill, long before safety gear became standard. No one knew that now. No one asked. He glanced back toward the crowd. Families were gathering under white pop-up tents, sipping from plastic water bottles and fanning themselves with folded programs. A man in a suit and sunglasses was shaking hands with donors near the media risers. Everyone had a name tag. Gregory didn't. He didn't own a printer. Didn't think to RSVP. It had never occurred to him that he'd need permission to stand beside the name of his shipmate. A gust of wind pushed across the plaza, lifting one corner of a wreath before a volunteer stepped forward to fix it. The sudden movement stirred Gregory's memory. He could still feel the deck shift beneath him, the sharp sway of the Pacific under a winter squall. Rusty had been laughing then, boots soaked, hand on a rail. That memory was always closer in heat or wind, never in silence. The cane tapped again. He turned slightly, angling himself for a clearer view. His eyes traced the names slowly, counting down from the top. Row 1, Row 2, Row 3. The security officer's voice came again, flatter now, but insistent. "Sir, I'm serious. This isn't the place for loitering. If you're not here for someone on the list, I am." The words weren't loud, but they carried, not because of force, but weight. The tone of someone who had earned the right to say little and still be heard. The officer blinked, caught off guard. "Do you have credentials? A pass?" Gregory didn't answer, just tapped his cane once more, then nodded toward the wall. "I served with one of those names. I come every year. Never needed a pass before." The officer opened his mouth, then closed it. Whatever protocol he had been trained for didn't quite seem to fit this. Gregory turned his gaze back to the stone. His hand rose slightly, as if to salute, then paused. He lowered it again. Not yet. A few more guests trickled in. Someone snapped a photo. A child began to cry and was quickly hushed. The program coordinator gave the go-ahead for final seating. Gregory hadn't moved. The ceremony began with the low murmur of introductions through a microphone. Tinny, distant, respectful. A chaplain in crisp uniform offered the opening prayer. his voice made hollow by the loudspeaker. The crowd stood, many placing hands over hearts, some fumbling to silence phones or steady restless children. Gregory Brenner removed his cap. He held it against his chest with the same hand that gripped the folded flag. His knuckles, thick and calloused, trembled just slightly, not from weakness, but the effort of perfect stillness. In that moment, he looked as though he belonged behind the podium more than any of the suited men surrounding it, but he remained where he was, outside the line. The security officer didn't speak again, but his eyes watched Gregory like a stray dog that had wandered too close to the edge of someone else's yard. He adjusted the strap on his radio, murmured something into it without turning away, then shifted his posture just enough to suggest finality. His stance was for show, not protection. A gust of wind picked up dust and leaves near the edge of the plaza. Gregory blinked it away, unmoved. His focus was fixed on the names. Each year, he would trace them in the air before approaching. It was his way. An unspoken roll call for those who would never answer. He could still recall the scent of diesel oil and wet paint from the ship's hull, the hiss of steam beneath the grates, the laughter echoing down steel corridors. These memories were kept behind the eyes, behind the stoic silence. No one saw them, but they were there, as close as his own shadow. A sharp laugh rang out behind him. Two teenagers stood across the street near the base of a monument. They weren't dressed for the occasion, sleeves torn, one wearing earbuds around his neck. The taller of the two pointed at Gregory with a crooked grin. "Guess he missed his reunion by 50 years, he said loudly. The other snorted, elbowing him. "Must be cosplay or something. Man's got a flag but no clue where he's going." Their laughter wasn't cruel, just careless, but it carried. Gregory didn't turn. He had lived long enough to know that the worst kind of disrespect wasn't shouted. It was laughed under the breath, passed around like candy, assumed harmless by those who never had to serve anything but themselves. He shifted slightly on his cane, raising his free hand again. This time he traced the shape of an H mid-air, then the C, Rusty Collins. Third row down, halfway across. He always started there. From the edge of the cordon, a woman in a long blue dress glanced toward Gregory. She hesitated, watching him. Her hands were clasped over a small leather purse. After a moment, she looked away and moved back toward the refreshment table. The loudspeaker crackled again. The ceremony was moving into the speeches. One of the presenters, a sharply dressed man from the Department of Veteran Affairs, began to speak about legacy. His words were polished, well rehearsed. He thanked the crowd for honoring the fallen. He spoke of service with gravity. He mentioned history, sacrifice, and national pride. Gregory stood completely still. The speech washed over him like water off stone, not because he disagreed with it, but because he had already lived it. The words weren't for men like him. They were for the audience, for the cameras, for the men with their jackets buttoned and ties straightened just so. A chair nearby scraped against concrete. A woman inside the barrier shifted, searching for her place in the program. Her child looked toward Gregory and whispered something. The mother turned the child's head forward again. No one offered him a chair. No one asked his name. He reached slowly into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out the photograph. Carefully, as though unfolding a memory itself, he raised it to his eyes. The edges had curled over time, corners yellowed. The image showed 5 men, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning through sweat and grime. Naval uniforms half-buttoned, boots caked with salt, hair mussed by wind. They looked impossibly young. Gregory ran his thumb along the corner. The security officer, now visibly tense, cleared his throat loudly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask again. You step back behind the marked perimeter. You've been standing here for quite some time." Gregory turned his head slightly, eyes still on the photo. "I'm not in the way. That's not the point. This area's not public." The officer pointed again toward the sidewalk. "There's space over there where you can watch." Gregory returned the photo to his jacket. His movements were slow, deliberate. precise. Then he nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the pressure. He took a single step back, then another. The flag remained tucked under his arm. His cap still rested against his chest. He gave a glance to the wall one more time and adjusted his stance. Shoulders square, heels aligned as best as the bad knee allowed. Another name was called out through the microphone. Another wreath laid. Applause followed, soft and obligatory. A drone buzzed faintly overhead, capturing shots for the press. Gregory's hand trembled again, just slightly. He used to say he had 2 steady hands and 1 steady memory. Now it felt like everything wobbled just a little, but not here. Not when he stood in front of those names. Not when he heard the sound of wind moving past flags and the heavy pause between ceremonial steps. A girl, maybe 8, approached the barrier from inside. She wore a white dress, frilled at the collar, with a small ribbon pinned to her chest. Her eyes were wide, curious. She looked at Gregory for a long moment, then stepped closer to the gate. Her fingers touched the rope. Gregory saw her and smiled faintly. The kind of smile that didn't reach the lips, but warmed the edges of the eyes. She looked as though she wanted to speak, but then her mother appeared behind her, grabbing her shoulder sharply and pulling her back without a word. The mother didn't look at Gregory, just past him. It was a small moment, a small silence, but one that said everything. He lowered his cap to his side, let the sun touch the skin beneath his thinning hair. His eyes were on the wall again, this time softer, not searching, remembering, because it wasn't just the names he came to see. It was what those names still carried, a voice only he could still hear. A moment of silence was called, and the plaza fell still. A bugler stood near the monument, shoulders back, trumpet lifted toward the sky. The first notes of taps floated into the stillness like smoke, slow, haunting, echoing through the plaza's stone corridors. Everyone stood, even those across the street. Hands found hearts, heads bowed. Gregory Brenner didn't move. He didn't need to. He had already bowed his head long before anyone asked. His flag remained cradled in the crook of his elbow. His cap still hung loosely in one hand. His eyes, wet at the corners now, stayed fixed on the name halfway down the wall, Harold Collins, etched forever, beside the ones who never came back. As the final note faded and the bugler lowered his horn, the plaza remained suspended in reverent pause. For a second, the world seemed to remember. Then the speakers cracked to life again, and just like that, the moment ended. A man in a tailored blue suit stepped up to the podium, papers in hand. His voice was polished, confident, timed for cameras. "We are gathered today not only to honor sacrifice, but to build bridges between our past and the future of this great country." Gregory took another step toward the gate. He wasn't attempting to enter, only to find a better angle. His line of sight had become obscured by a cluster of photographers who now crowded near the monument. He leaned slightly to the right, balancing carefully against his cane. That was when the officer snapped again. "I've already told you, sir. Step back. This is your final warning." The tone wasn't just firm now. It was loud, calculated for dominance, meant to signal to others that this man was no longer just a bystander, but a problem. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Even the man at the podium glanced sideways before continuing his remarks. Gregory stopped mid-motion. He straightened his back, slowly, without reacting to the volume of the command. His hands moved reflexively, repositioning the flag in the crook of his arm as though shielding it from something. "I'm not inside the barrier," he said gently. "I'm not causing harm." The officer stepped forward this time, closing the space between them by 2 full strides. His hand hovered near the radio on his shoulder. His jaw was set tight, the kind of tight that comes from authority feeling challenged, even when it hasn't been. "You've been told to move. This is a restricted perimeter. Last time I'll ask." Gregory didn't answer right away. He adjusted his footing. The pain in his left knee flared briefly. He hid it well, but the shift in breath was there if anyone had been watching closely. His voice, when it came again, was quiet. level. I came to honor a friend. You can do that from back there. I've come the same way every year. I didn't know it changed. The officer's expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew more severe. He took a small step forward again, now uncomfortably close. Close enough that the tone shifted from official to personal. You can't just show up and expect special treatment. At that, a woman nearby, a mid-ranking uniformed aide, glanced up from her clipboard. She hesitated, her brow furrowed. For a breath, she seemed about to speak. Then her superior called her name from across the plaza. She turned and walked away. Gregory stood silent, not from fear, but from experience. The kind that teaches a man that some arguments don't need winning to be understood. The officer stepped back, clearly satisfied he had made his point. His voice returned to an even tone, rehearsed and impersonal. Please return to the public area. This is for invited guests only. Gregory nodded slowly. Then, carefully, he reached into his jacket. The motion was deliberate, not sudden, but it was met instantly with tension. The officer's hand twitched toward his belt. His eyes narrowed. From the jacket, Gregory pulled a small, weathered photograph. He held it out, not to challenge, but to show. This is the man I'm here for, Lieutenant Collins. We served together. The officer didn't take the photo. He didn't even look at it. Sir, I'm not going to review documents. That's not my role. It's not a document, Gregory replied. It's his face. The officer turned slightly, shaking his head. A few feet away, a boy watched through the ropes, curious. He whispered something to his grandfather beside him, a man in his 70s, wearing a jacket with an old combat unit patch on the sleeve. The grandfather's eyes narrowed at the scene unfolding. He started to rise from his seat, leaned forward on his cane, but his daughter placed a hand on his arm. "Let it go, Dad," she whispered. The older man hesitated, then sank back down into his chair. Gregory stood there, still holding the photo, and no one took it. A breeze stirred again. The flag against his side fluttered slightly in the wind, but he caught it with one hand, protecting the corners. His movements were gentle, almost reverent. The man at the podium kept speaking. These are not just names, but legacies. Each one represents a story of bravery, of selflessness, of American pride. Behind that speech, a man who had lived those stories stood ignored. The officer radioed something low, brief. Gregory couldn't hear it. He didn't ask. He simply bent slightly at the waist, slowly, painfully, and retrieved the photograph he had now tucked beneath the strap of his cane for safekeeping. The act itself, bending with such care, took longer than it should have, and still, no one helped. The crowd returned to the program. Heads turned back. Attention faded. Only one pair of eyes stayed fixed on Gregory. From across the plaza, beside the ceremonial honor guard, a woman in uniform had stopped walking. She hadn't moved in several minutes. Her eyes tracked Gregory's every motion, not with curiosity but with recognition. Her hand rested lightly at her hip. Her posture was perfect, her expression unreadable. She had not yet intervened, but something in her had changed. Gregory Brenner stepped back, just as he had been told. The motion was slow, deliberate, and entirely his own. No panic, no argument. His cane tapped softly once against the stone walkway, followed by the steady shuffle of one well-worn boot. The other foot followed with a pause, like a man accustomed to uneven decks and creaking steel beneath his stride. He did not glance again at the officer. There was nothing left to say. The crowd returned to its ceremony, the attention of the masses drawn once more to the booming voices and polished words echoing from the loudspeakers. The great weight of spectacle moved forward, uncaring, unbothered. The wall stood as it always had, impassive, carved with reverent silence. Gregory stood just outside the boundary now, precisely where they wanted him. But in posture and presence, he remained unmoved. He adjusted the flag under his arm, smoothing the folded corner with the side of his palm. The creases were still sharp. He had kept them that way for over 40 years. It wasn't just fabric. It was every name he'd ever spoken softly at sea, every goodbye that never made it past the shore. His cap was returned to his head, not out of resignation, but as part of ritual. The brim was lowered gently, eyes shaded, shoulders aligned with invisible lines only he could see. A whisper of a breeze moved across the plaza again, lifting the edge of his jacket. He didn't react. He reached for the photograph once more, the one the officer hadn't dared touch. With careful fingers, he tucked it back into the inner pocket of his coat, pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. Then, as if guided by an internal compass, Gregory raised his hand in salute. No one called for it. No one noticed. There was no bugle, no prompt. But he lifted his right hand to his brow, elbow bent precisely, fingers straight, thumb aligned, and held the gesture like a stone statue. The crowd carried on behind him. The speeches swelled. Names were listed, medals described. A poem was read by a local councilwoman. Somewhere nearby, a bottle rolled from beneath a folding chair, clattering briefly across the stone before being caught. Life continued. But Gregory did not lower his hand. His arm held steady for a full 10 seconds. Not a moment shorter. Not a moment longer. Long enough for anyone paying attention to see that this man had not forgotten the protocol of honor, even if the world had forgotten him. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand, straightened his shoulders, and breathed. The movement of his chest was shallow, but full, like someone gathering something invisible in the air. His eyes traced the wall again, this time with quiet familiarity. His gaze stopped at one place. Left column, midway down, Harold Collins. Gregory's fingers moved again, not toward the wall. He remained respectfully behind the barrier, but in the air. They hovered near his waist, forming shapes. An R, then a C. He whispered the name, but no one heard it but him. His back ached. The knee throbbed now in its full protest, but he made no motion to sit. There were benches nearby, public seating. He could have taken one, but his place was here, upright, within view of the wall. Years ago, when he stood over Rusty's body in the Pacific foam, he'd promised something. It had not been loud, not dramatic, just a quiet oath between two men who had seen what most couldn't name. I'll come back. Every year, I'll say your name. He had kept that promise, and now, even fenced off from the marble, even ignored by strangers and spoken to like a stray, he kept it still. A bird landed near the corner of the memorial. Gregory watched it briefly, noting how it hopped twice before flying off. The sun was higher now, making the stone shimmer. Names lit up and disappeared again depending on how the light fell. Behind him, 2 volunteers shared a joke, the laughter muffled behind paper programs. Still, he remained unmoved. Precision had been taught to him in youth, not as performance, but necessity. Ship life didn't reward carelessness. The old rules stayed with him. Square corners on bunks, boots polished every week, flag folds tight enough to balance a coin. The flag under his arm had been folded in silence the day they brought it to him. He had refolded it himself that night, not out of disrespect, but because no one could know how sharp those folds needed to be except the man who had shared that deck. His hand moved to it again now, pressing gently where the first triangle met the second. The wind shifted once more, and in the corner of his eye, he noticed something. Movement. Subtle. Barely more than a ripple in the crowd. Across the plaza, near the ceremonial wreaths, a uniformed figure had stopped walking. She stood with her hands loosely clasped behind her back, eyes fixed not on the wall, but on him. Her uniform was dark olive, starched and fresh. A nameplate glinted on her chest, but the distance made it unreadable. Still, her posture spoke volumes. Major Celeste Ramirez, National Guard, a combat veteran herself, known for quiet action over pageantry. She had been moving toward her assigned place with the honor guard when she saw Gregory standing behind the rope line. She hadn't taken another step since. Her face was unreadable, but her body was still tense. a slight lean forward, like someone reading something only they could recognize. She didn't speak. She didn't wave. She just stood and watched. And Gregory, for the first time in an hour, looked away from the wall. Their eyes met, briefly. Then he gave her the smallest of nods. Not an invitation, a recognition. And that was enough. Major Celeste Ramirez had seen the ceremony unfold before. She had attended it 3 years running, each time in full uniform, each time standing silently as the speeches echoed across the plaza. But this year, something pulled her gaze from the polished words and perfect symmetry of the program. Something off to the edge. Something everyone else had dismissed. She was halfway between the line of honor guard and the central wreath display when she saw the man. At first, he appeared like any other older guest. Modest clothing, hands clasped, a folded flag under his arm. But there was something in the way he held stillness, a kind of reverent stillness she recognized but hadn't seen in years. The security officer had stepped away by now, back to pacing his perimeter, radio clipped tight to his shoulder. The crowd had lost interest in the earlier exchange. The old man had been put back in his place. To them, the problem had passed, but not to her. She didn't resume walking. She didn't lower her eyes. She simply stood there, back straight, arms relaxed but firm at her sides, watching. It was the way he turned, not quickly, not weakly, but with the kind of deliberate motion that came from training. Not recent training, older than hers. Naval maybe, precise, measured. His movements weren't wasted. He carried his cane like an extension of his body, not a burden. He didn't lean on it heavily. It was there for balance, not identity. She noticed the way he handled the flag, not cradled like a symbol, but like a memory, a living one. He kept adjusting it as if afraid the corners might come loose, as if every edge meant something only he could see. Her father had done that. Back home after his funeral, she'd found his flag still in the box they gave her, untouched. But inside his dresser drawer, folded with a precision that felt sacred, was the same flag he'd brought back from his own father's service, one her grandfather had been given after being declared missing off the coast of Saipan. That flag had the same sharp corners, the same frayed edge where fingers had touched it too many times. She watched now as the old man reached up, brushed a thread off his lapel, and settled his hat against his head with a precision that caught her chest tight for a second. That's not cosplay. The words came softly, unbidden. She glanced around. No one else had noticed. The volunteers had resumed their duties. Dignitaries sipped from water bottles. A camera drone buzzed overhead. A choir lined up near the podium, ready to sing the national anthem. And the man stood there, barely shifting, like a solitary figure in a storm, unmoved by the world spinning around him. She took one step forward. Not a full stride, just the decision to shift her weight. A fellow officer nearby glanced at her, but said nothing. There was a rhythm to these events. Interruption wasn't expected, but she had already broken formation by standing still, and something deeper, older, more instinctual was stirring now beneath the fabric of her uniform. She thought of her father again, how he used to test her when she was young. How do you know a soldier when he doesn't speak? She remembered answering, "You look at his medals." He had shaken his head. "No, you look at how he stands when no one is looking." Her eyes locked once more onto the old man behind the rope. He wasn't looking for attention, wasn't trying to press past the line, wasn't demanding recognition. He was simply waiting like someone who had made a promise to someone who could no longer answer. The security guard passed by again. She saw his glance at the man, short, dismissive, followed by a quick shake of the head. Still the man didn't move. Still he didn't speak. And still she watched. Her hand shifted slightly, unconsciously, toward the front seam of her jacket. Not to reach for anything, just resting on the edge, a grounding gesture. Her fingers traced the embroidered border of her nameplate. She didn't realize she was holding her breath. The choir began softly behind her. "America the Beautiful." Their voices warm, reverent, in tune. People around her closed their eyes. Some placed hands over hearts. She did none of these things. Her focus was still on the man outside the barrier. He had lowered his head just slightly now, not in shame, but remembrance. And in that quiet gesture, small, unnoticed by the crowd, she saw something she hadn't realized she'd been missing for years. Not duty, not service, but devotion. A devotion not to country alone, but to those who never came back. A devotion that didn't wear a microphone, that didn't require an audience. That devotion was standing 30 feet away with a faded cap, a crumpled photograph, and a flag folded with the hands of someone who had never forgotten. She exhaled softly and decided she wasn't going to move again. Not until he did. The choir's final note dissolved into the air like smoke curling into sky. The hush it left behind was almost sacred. That lingering stillness after harmony, where breath is held and hearts are open. A pause that seemed to stretch longer than it should have. Then the master of ceremonies stepped forward, tapping the microphone gently, his voice now the center of gravity. Applause rose, scattered and uneven. A rustle of programs, the scrape of folding chairs. The reverent quiet of tribute was already shifting back into the routine rhythm of a public event. But one person did not move with the flow. Major Celeste Ramirez was already walking, not fast, not dramatic, not even with full intent visible. She moved as if led by something beneath language, a recognition, not a decision. Her boots struck the flagstone with precision, soft but final, the sound cutting faintly through the murmur around her. Her posture remained upright, military sharp, but there was something in her face, a solemn narrowing of the eyes, that turned more than one head as she passed. The crowd didn't yet know what was happening, but something about her movement slowed them. From his place just outside the barrier, Gregory Brenner shifted his gaze slightly. He'd seen her earlier, among the rows of ceremony, noticed her uniform, registered her stillness. But now, she was crossing the invisible boundary that divided guests from guests of honor, those allowed in and those left out. She stopped 3 feet from him. There was no salute, no smile. She did not reach for his hand or ask his name. She simply stood beside him, facing the wall, matching his silence with her own. Gregory looked at her, not questioning, not startled. His eyes carried the wear of decades, but they didn't lower in confusion. There was something unspoken that passed between them, a signal that did not require words. She reached out, palm up. Gregory hesitated, then placed the photograph into her hand. She held it carefully, examined it slowly. The image, 5 young sailors, sweat-streaked, sea-battered, arms around each other. The kind of photo you didn't pose for. The kind taken after something hard, something survived. One man in the center, hand on his hip, the name Collins barely visible, stenciled above his chest pocket. She looked back at Gregory. "Where was this taken?" she asked softly. Gregory's voice came low, like gravel shaped into reverence. "Incheon, October of '52, day after the rescue." She nodded, lips pressed together in a line that trembled at the corners. Then she turned. The officer who had earlier barked his orders was standing further down the rope, near the security tent. Ramirez's voice was steady, not raised, but sharp enough to cut through the drone of conversation. "You just barred a Wilcox survivor," she said. The officer blinked, stunned into a silence that rippled outward like a dropped stone. People turned. The name hit the air like a forgotten bell. Wilcox. The name meant something to some. Not everyone, but enough. A few in the crowd looked up sharply. Others whispered. A reporter lowered her camera and stared. Someone murmured, "Did she say Wilcox?" The event coordinator, a man in a charcoal suit with a wireless mic clipped to his collar, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, What?" Ramirez didn't look at him. She turned back to Gregory, handed him the photo with both hands, respectfully, as one would return a flag, and then, with practiced precision, she stepped back, drew to full attention, and saluted. She held it, not for cameras, not for performance, for him. And Gregory Brenner, who had been standing in silence, in heat, in dismissal, received the salute like a man remembering how to breathe. The plaza, for the first time all morning, went truly silent, a kind of silence that didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. The officer who had dismissed him earlier took a small step forward, then stopped. His voice caught in his throat, the clipboard in his hand lowered to his side. The organizer blinked, his mouth parted slightly, lost between protocol and shame. And Gregory, quietly, calmly, stepped forward. One boot, one cane, one breath. He did not need to cross the barrier, because in that moment, the barrier moved to let him through. Gregory did not speak. He didn't need to. He stepped past the threshold as if crossing the deck of a ship, slowly, with weight behind every motion. His cane tapped once against the stone path, then held firm beneath his grip as he moved forward beside Major Ramirez, who remained at attention until he was beside her. She lowered her salute with care, not ceremony. Then she fell into step beside him. No announcement was made. No voice rose to explain the change in course. But across the plaza, the effect was instant. Conversations softened. Heads turned. The choir, still loosely gathered, went quiet. Even the cameras, moments earlier focused on a line of dignitaries seated under white canopy tents, began to pan toward the scene unfolding not on the main stage, but in the quiet just beside it. Gregory's breath was steady, not deep, not hurried. Each inhale precise. His eyes did not scan the crowd. He looked forward, not toward the people, but toward the wall. His flag, still folded and tucked in the crook of his arm, remained untouched, though his hand brushed across it once, gently, as if reminding himself it was still there. He and Ramirez said nothing, but there was something in the way they moved together, not locked in time, not rehearsed, but shared, like two currents running side by side, neither overtaking the other, both shaped by tides that outsiders couldn't see. They reached the memorial wall. The stone shimmered under the high sun, names etched in perfect lines. Gregory stopped in front of the second column, halfway down, and let his eyes land on the one he had spoken aloud so many times, in so many quiet places, Lieutenant Harold Collins. He did not reach out. He did not touch the wall. Instead, he stood with his hands by his sides, chin slightly lifted, and let the silence rise up between them like mist. Behind him, Ramirez stood without shifting. Her posture was not stiff, but alert, the kind of stillness that soldiers learn, not from drill, but from waiting through storms. After a moment, Gregory spoke. He jumped in after a kid who slipped on the catwalk, lost his footing. The water pulled him under before I could even turn. His voice didn't crack, but it came with a gravity that made it land heavier than any eulogy. The words didn't fall into the silence. They became the silence. Ramirez didn't answer. She didn't need to. She stepped forward, just once, and placed her hand on the wall. Not on the name, not to trace the letters, just near it. Her fingers rested flat against the cool stone, skin meeting granite in the only gesture appropriate for something sacred. Gregory looked down, his brow furrowed slightly, not in confusion, but emotion so deep it couldn't find the surface. Their eyes met in the reflection. That was enough. Behind them, movement began. Slow, hesitant. A woman in a floral blouse lowered her phone. A teenager beside her, still wearing earbuds, took them out without quite realizing it. Across the plaza, the officer who had raised his voice now stood frozen in place, lips parted as if halfway to a response he no longer remembered how to give. Then, without signal or instruction, people began to stand. Not in rows, not in unison, but one by one, pulled upward by something quiet and ancient. A veteran in a wheelchair raised a trembling hand in salute. A boy beside him followed suit, small hand at his brow. An older woman folded her program and pressed it gently to her chest. No one was told to do this. There were no orders. It just happened. Because in that stillness, in that shared silence between two people who had seen and lost and served and remembered, something had been restored. Not with a speech, not with applause, but with presence. Someone in the back whispered, "That's the Wilcox." The name passed from lips to lips like a rumor, like a flame catching dry kindling. Wilcox. He's one of them. Gregory heard it, but he didn't turn. He simply nodded once, eyes never leaving the wall. Ramirez lowered her hand from the granite. Then, gently, reverently, she stepped back, letting him remain alone for a moment, because this wasn't her memory to carry. It was his. The name hung between them like a bell that had already been rung. Gregory Brenner stood in stillness, his eyes locked on the smooth black stone where Harold Rusty Collins was engraved. There were hundreds of names on the wall, but he didn't see them. Not now. Just the one. The one he had said aloud each year without fail, no matter the weather, no matter the aches in his joints or the growing blur of memory that age threatened to bring. Major Ramirez stood a few steps behind, eyes lowered, hands behind her back. The plaza was hushed. No one resumed conversation. No one dared to break the spell. Then a voice, low and tentative, came from the left. "Is that the Wilcox?" It wasn't loud, but it echoed, like a question with history behind it. Someone else repeated it nearby, uncertain, and then another. Gregory turned slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge what had been said. A man in his early 50s, wearing a Veterans of Foreign Wars cap and holding a folded program, stepped closer from the crowd. "My uncle used to talk about the Wilcox. Always said the ones who made it back. Didn't talk much about why." Gregory nodded once, eyes calm. "That sounds right." The man took another step forward. "He said there was one sailor who stayed below deck during the fires, refused evacuation, said he was holding the pressure valve when the system failed." Gregory didn't blink. "There were wounded in the corridor. I wasn't going to leave them there." The words weren't boastful. They came out like gravel soaked in quiet resolve. Someone nearby inhaled sharply. An older woman turned to whisper to her husband. Slowly, the story began to ripple through the crowd like a current released from a dam. "You were there?" the man asked. Gregory turned back to the wall. "I was below when the engine compartment caught. Rusty was topside. He heard the shouts, ran toward the fire, pulled 2 boys out before the deck caved under him." He paused, not to gather his thoughts, but to remember exactly what happened, exactly how it felt. There was steam, oil on the floor. I could smell it boiling off the steel. The walls were too hot to touch. And then there was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after everything breaks at once. His voice had lowered, like a confession to the air. "I never saw him again. But I saw the boy he saved. Carried him out with a dislocated shoulder and a torn boot. That boy lived, had 4 daughters, sent me a photo once. He touched his coat where the photograph rested, but didn't pull it out this time. A woman from the planning committee, the one who earlier had gently ushered her daughter away from Gregory, stepped forward now. Her expression had changed. There was no more polite detachment, no public duty in her eyes. Just something softer, something learning how to carry shame. "You never told anyone?" she asked. He shrugged. "Didn't need to." "Why not?" Gregory looked at her. His voice was dry but steady. "I wasn't the story. Rusty was." There it was. The sentence that made the silence heavier than it had been all day. A man in dress blues, who had previously kept to the side, now stepped forward. His uniform was immaculate. Rows of ribbons decorated his chest. He removed his cap slowly, stepping toward Gregory with reverence. "Sir, I served on the USS Lucas. We were trained on the Wilcox file. You're listed as unaccounted for during the internal containment breach. I thought..." Gregory gave a tired smile. "I know. They marked me missing for 12 hours. I was under the catwalk, trapped under debris. Woke up with Rusty's voice in my head telling me not to give in." The man's eyes widened, and slowly, without prompting, he saluted. Gregory didn't salute back immediately. He looked to the wall again. And when he did lift his hand, it wasn't in return. It was toward Rusty's name. To him, Gregory said. Major Ramirez finally stepped forward, her voice low, reverent. My father, he used to tell me stories about the Wilcox. Said there was a sailor who kept holding the valve even after his skin had started to burn. Said he wouldn't leave until they got out. Gregory nodded once. Your father was with the 5th Marines? Yes, she said. He was one of the men who pulled the injured onto the skiff. Said they never saw the sailor again, just the smoke. Gregory exhaled through his nose. The memory was always sharper in the sun. The smell of it, the light behind his eyelids, the feel of metal screaming under heat. It never dulled. A hush had fallen over the entire plaza now. No one returned to their seats. Even the volunteers had frozen near the tents. The event schedule lay forgotten on the ground. The moment had shifted, not by design, but by truth. And the truth had arrived quietly, dressed in worn canvas and leather, standing where no one had wanted him to be. The sound that followed Gregory's words was not applause. It wasn't gasps or murmurs, or any of the easy responses people give when they don't know how to feel. It was silence, a long, open stillness that stretched across the plaza like a flag held taut in the wind. The crowd stood as if suspended, not frozen by fear or shame, but by awakening. People who had arrived thinking they understood what this day meant now found themselves face to face with something they hadn't planned for. Not a name in a program, not a speech on a stage, but a man, quiet and worn, who had never asked to be remembered, and came anyway. The event coordinator, still holding his clipboard, stepped forward. His steps were slower now, less certain. He glanced between Gregory, Ramirez, and the wall. His tie had loosened. Sweat dotted his temples, not from heat, but from understanding what he'd almost missed. He stopped beside them, hat in hand. Sir, he said gently, I didn't know. Gregory didn't turn to look at him. You didn't ask. The words weren't bitter, just true. The man nodded. Once, slowly, then turned toward the officer still standing near the edge of the cordon. There was no need to speak. The look was enough. The security guard lowered his head, the brim of his cap shadowing the flush rising in his face. Another aide approached from the side entrance. She leaned toward the coordinator, whispering rapidly, eyes flicking toward the street. The coordinator's expression shifted. Then he stepped back, straightened his collar, and turned toward the crowd with hands raised slightly, not commanding, but requesting attention. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steadier now, less performative. I've just been informed that the governor's motorcade is arriving early. Heads turned. Down the avenue, the low thrum of black sedans approached. American flags fluttered on the hoods. Motorcycle escorts peeled ahead, clearing the final stretch. The crowd instinctively stepped back, forming a corridor of bodies between the road and the memorial. Gregory did not move. He remained by the wall, hat in hand, flag still tucked beneath his arm. Ramirez stood beside him, unmoving. The vehicles came to a stop with smooth precision. Doors opened. Aides stepped out first, scanning the area, conferring quietly. Then the governor emerged. He was dressed in a dark suit, flag pin on the lapel, his stride confident but respectful. He didn't head toward the podium. He didn't approach the press or the prepared stage. He walked toward Gregory. The crowd parted for him, not out of obligation, but in recognition that the path he had chosen, to the man who hadn't been allowed in, was the only one that mattered now. He approached with measured steps, eyes locked on Gregory's face. When he reached him, he stopped, removed his own cap, and offered a crisp, respectful salute. Gregory returned it. It was not dramatic. It was not embellished. Just two men, of different eras, meeting in a single gesture of equal weight. The governor lowered his hand. I didn't come here today expecting to meet the reason this wall exists, he said quietly. But I know it when I see it. Gregory tilted his head, just slightly. I didn't come for that either. What did you come for? The governor asked. Gregory looked back at the name on the wall. To touch his name, to say it out loud. The governor nodded. Then he turned to his aides. I want a policy change drafted by the end of the day. From this point forward, any veteran who approaches this memorial, I don't care if they're on a list or not, they are to be escorted in, with dignity." An aide scribbled furiously. The others nodded. He turned back to Gregory. "No vet gets turned away. Not on my watch." Ramirez stepped forward then, standing at Gregory's other side. She looked toward the governor, then out at the still silent crowd. "This wall holds names, but it's the people still breathing who carry the burden of remembrance. Today, we almost let that burden fall, and this man held it alone." A woman in the crowd wept quietly. A younger man, maybe in his 30s, wearing a faded Marine Corps sweatshirt, stepped forward and placed a small bouquet of flowers at the base of the wall. He didn't speak, just knelt for a moment, then rose. Another followed, and another. Soon, the line of people waiting to approach the wall, not for selfies, not for ceremony, but for silence, stretched beyond the path. Gregory stepped back. He didn't want to be the center of it, but as he turned to leave, the governor stopped him. "Mr. Brenner," he said, "is there anything we can do to honor your friend?" Gregory thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No plaque, no speech. Just say his name. Keep saying it." The governor nodded again, and then, softly, he said it out loud. "Harold Collins." It was not a headline. It was a promise. 1 week later, the plaza was quieter. The tents were gone. The flags no longer flapped in fanfare. The stage had been disassembled, but something lingered in the air. The kind of after-silence left behind by events that meant something, even if they were never supposed to happen. A new addition stood at the far edge of the memorial path. It wasn't grand. It wasn't bronze or bold or built for ceremony. It was just a bench, a simple dark wood bench with a back worn smooth by craftsmanship and intent. Beneath it, fixed with small brass screws, was a plaque, no larger than a paperback, no shinier than the sidewalk around it. It read, "For those who remember the forgotten, no name, no title, just a sentence, a place to pause, a place to remember." And there, sitting with his cane resting beside him and the folded flag on his lap, was Gregory Brenner. He didn't speak much. He didn't have to. He had returned to the plaza that morning without announcement, without escort, without asking permission. The security officer who had once blocked him now greeted him with a nod and a quiet, respectful, "Morning, sir." No clipboard in hand, just open eyes. Gregory nodded back. He sat in silence for a while, watching the sun climb the polished wall. The names caught light differently each hour. He knew that now. He liked to come early, when the names seemed to glow from within, rather than reflect what was outside them. A few passers-by approached. Not in crowds, just one or two at a time. A young cadet in uniform sat beside him, nervous at first, back straight, unsure whether to speak. Gregory handed him a small paper cup of coffee from a thermos already poured and said nothing. They sat that way for 10 minutes before the cadet finally asked, "Did you know someone on the wall?" Gregory nodded once. He was a better man than I'll ever be. They sipped in silence after that. Later, a small girl approached. She wore a backpack too large for her frame and held a crumpled drawing in her hand. Her mother stood behind her, gently encouraging, but didn't follow. The girl held the paper out to Gregory. It was a drawing of a soldier and a flag, with the words, "Thank you for remembering." Gregory unfolded it carefully, the same way he handled the flag, as if everything fragile deserved the same respect. He looked at the drawing for a long time, then tucked it inside his coat pocket, right beside the photograph. At noon, a group of high school students visited on a class field trip. Their teacher, a soft-spoken man in his early 40s, gestured toward the wall, then toward the bench. "That's Mr. Brenner," he said. "He doesn't give speeches, but you can sit and listen, and if he decides to share something, you'll want to remember it." One by one, the students approached, hesitant at first, but drawn in by something they couldn't quite name. Gregory didn't tell them war stories. He told them about Rusty, about the way he laughed when the rain came sideways, about how he knew every creak of the ship's lower decks, about how he once fixed a leaking valve with a spoon handle and a prayer, about how, when the alarm screamed and the heat rose through the floor, he didn't think twice. He just ran toward the sound. He was the kind of man who didn't need medals, Gregory said softly. Just a friend to say his name out loud. They sat with him until the teacher called them away. Some shook his hand. One girl asked if she could sit on the bench after he left. "You can sit there any time," he said. "That's the point of it." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the memorial, Gregory rose. He did so carefully, slowly, with a groan in the knees and a steady hand on the cane. He took one last look at the wall, at the name that never aged, at the memory that never dulled. Then he turned and walked away, not as a man who had been finally recognized, but as one who had always known why he came. Behind him, the bench remained, and over time, more people sat there, some in silence, some in conversation, a few with tears, a few with laughter, but always with memory. The kind that doesn't fade, the kind that is carried, one name at a time. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.